Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. And rather than teaching amongst a crowd, as Jesus has been doing for these last few chapters, we have him traveling to Jerusalem, and there, kind of near the border of 2 other places, he runs into these 10 lepers. Now, the lepers are outside of the city because if we remember how lepers were supposed to live, that once you had this infectious skin disease, you were supposed to remove yourself from the community. You were supposed to protect family and friends and neighbors by not being around them. It was a terrible disease. It was a communicable disease. You could infect other people so that they would have to suffer like you were going to suffer. So what you do is you are kind of an exile out there. You had to go to the priest, and the priest would say, yeah, this is a certain skin condition that's not going to get better, and other people could catch it, so now you got to go. And so they would make these little camps outside of town so they could still, try to work and try to eat, but they were not living with family and friends. They were not living amongst their neighbors or their co-workers. They were outside of town. They were just living together. They were suffering with this own disease, and they were instructed by the law of Moses. Wear old, ragged, torn clothes. Let your hair grow out. Make your appearance become disheveled. And when you see people coming, you need to announce, I'm unclean. That's me. This guy right here. I'm dirty. I'm infectious. I'm contagious. Keep your distance. Super encouraging, right? You not only suffer on the outside, but you have to be the one to announce continually to people, don't come near me and don't touch me because I'm dirty. Think of how spirit-crushing this disease must have been. And we can hear these rules and regulations and think, oh, that's just mean. Those poor people, it's not their fault they have this disease. And it's just not right. I wouldn't do that. Okay. Now, it's true that the disease that the Old Testament refers to as leprosy is really kind of a whole collection of infectious skin diseases. It is not necessarily what we refer to as modern-day Hansen's disease. It could be a bunch of different things. And Hansen's disease, or modern-day leprosy, which is treatable through antibiotics and can be cured and healed, they don't have those. There is no treatment for this. And it is either painful or it is disfiguring. And you can spread it to the people who mean the most to you. What else are they supposed to do other than separate people out? To try to keep a disease from spreading like wildfire. If you already have to suffer with it, do you want your wife or your children or your friends to get this too? Or would you kind of take that bullet yourself if you had to? A miserable existence? Yes. A lonely existence? Yes. Suffering on the outside and on the inside? Yes. But what is the alternative? That everybody suffers like you? That this spreads until everyone is miserable? And so, while it is tragic, there is a fundamental sense of protection to the people that we care about. Now, we can still hear this and say, yeah, but, I would trust in God that He wouldn't let me get sick just by helping them or being around them. And I think, oh, okay, yeah, that's good. I mean, I'm glad I'm around such faithful people who care so deeply. And so, to help you out with this, I propose a little experiment. So, in like 20 minutes, we're going to have communion. Body of Christ, we're in heaven. Body of Christ, we're in heaven. Body of Christ, we're in heaven. Right? Because you're real faithful, right? All right? wants to be exposed to something that could potentially make them sick. Nobody wants to be exposed to the viruses or germs or bacterium or whatever it is that might give them some kind of condition that would cause them to suffer. Whether it's the 21st century or the 1st century, everyone has that kind of sense of self-preservation or care for the other person. And some people, they'll make sure they intinct in the chalice or what have you. I mean, we ought to understand this because we still basically do it, right? This is not way out there. But the good news is because we're all such faithful Christians, that as we read this story, 10 of these lepers who have been exiled from family and friends, 10 of these lepers whose lives are just destroyed and crushed and lost, 10 of these lepers who suffer both in body and in spirit, having to announce regularly that they are unworthy, unclean, and should not be approached, that 10 of them are healed. They beg Jesus for mercy and pity. He says, go show yourself to the priest. On the way to do that, they are healed, and one comes back to give thanks. 1 out of 10. 10%. That is a failing grade, even in our current educational system. We are such faithful Christians, though, that obviously we're the one, right? We're not like those 9. I mean, they're rotten. How ungrateful. With God healed me. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I know there are times where I'm grateful and thankful. God does something miraculous for me. I'm grateful. I'm thankful. I would want to offer thanks and praise, but have there ever been times where I have been something less than grateful? I mean, not you guys, but I'm just talking about me. Any opportunity where I've kind of grumbled a little bit, or my circumstances are not ideal, and in light of everything that I have been granted, of everything that I've been given, of everything that I've been blessed with, of all those answered prayers, of all the times where there was no way, but God has made a way in my life. God made a way on behalf of others. God granted me another day today. He gave me all my stuff. He gave me my life, my wife, my family, my kids, everything. My heart beats and my lungs take in air because He has granted it to me. But then something doesn't go my way. Or a little. And I know I can do that. Once again, not you guys. I know you would never do that. But at my best, yes, absolutely. I am the one guy who comes back and gives thanks and praise. Yep, I feel good about that. Honest truth, how often am I at my best? Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm a little off. Sometimes I'm not feeling it, or sometimes I am thinking about other things, preoccupied or worried or concerned, or noticing all the bad stuff instead of the good stuff, all the difficulties instead of the blessings, and I might grumble a little bit or complain a little bit, or maybe just not be filled with constant and perpetual thanks and praise and gratitude. If I were to be honest, I think I identify more with the 9 than with the 1. Wish it weren't so, but I think it kind of is what it is. That sense of overwhelming, constant thankfulness and praise, I just don't maintain it. Could I? Maybe. Should I? I have more than enough reason to. My guess is you do too. There's a real interesting element to the Passover story, the Haggadah, as it is offered at the traditional Seder supper. So when Jews gather once a year in preparation for the Passover to retell the story of how God delivers them from slavery and bondage to Egypt and through the plagues and through the Red Sea on dry land and into life and into a land of promise, and he gives them law and all this other sort of stuff. After the story is told, after the elements of the meal are explained in their symbolic importance, there's typically a traditional song or a stated poem that's given that has a repeated refrain. Diuno. What happens is, that same story that they heard is broken into pieces, and the people respond after each piece, Diuno. If God had heard our cries and did nothing else, Diuno, it would have been enough. If God had heard our cries and delivered us from the Egyptians, it would have been enough. Diuno. If God had delivered us from the Egyptians, but had not saved us from the plagues, it would have been enough. Diuno. If God had delivered us from the plagues, but he had not taken us through the Red Sea on dry land, it would have been enough. Diuno. If he had not drawn on and on and on, and the story is broken down, and at every phrase, after it has been repeated what God has done, the people say it would have been enough. If God's blessings had stopped right then and there, and they were never shown another fragment of grace, they still would have had more than enough reason for perpetual thanks and praise. So Diuno, it would have been enough. Can you think of an answered prayer in your life? Can you remember the mercy and pity of God to you in your need and distress? Has he healed you? Has he blessed you? Has he comforted you and strengthened you? Has he given you your life up to this very moment? Diuno, it would have been enough. If God never answers another prayer, has he given you enough already that you ought to be thankful and grateful and give him praise? We like to identify with the one healed leper who comes back and says, "Thank you so very much." I fear that by and by, and in a general sense, it's much, much easier to identify with the 9 going about their merry lives. I mean, happy about it. I mean, they do what Jesus said. He said, go show the priest. Go fulfill the Mosaic law. Just like the law of Moses says this is how you need to be isolated to protect others, the Mosaic law also says if you've been healed, you have to go show the same priest who decreed that your illness was contagious, and then that priest will then proclaim that you are healed. And you can be welcomed back into society. So think about that in practical terms. You've been healed of this terrible disease that has kept you away from family and friends. You don't necessarily just walk back home and say, "Hey, guess what? Great news! I'm healed! Everybody come give me a wet, sloppy kiss." You think they're going to believe you? But if you follow the law of Moses, which said in the same way that the priest had to examine you to say that this hits the correct criteria for you to be removed from the society, well, this now fulfills the criteria where you can be welcomed back. And there's actual, there's a specific sacrifice you're supposed to give in thanks and all this other sort of stuff. So Jesus, who did not come to abolish the law but to fulfill it, he tells these lepers, go show the priest because you are about to be welcomed back home. You who have been dead are now to be restored back to life. And God's authority will pronounce for everyone to know and hear, it's time for you to come home. Now, just FYI, that is an Old Testament regulation. We have now been freed from such regulations by the grace of Christ. So please, do not feel it necessary to come show me your skin lesions. What is this thing? Is that a wound? What is that? You want to touch that? Not necessary. It's all right. these were men who were not only healed of a dread disease, but these were men who were given their lives back. They were literally dead to the world, dead to friends, dead to family, dead to life. Jesus, have mercy on me, and he says yes. And they will be welcomed back and brought back home from death to life. Now, though this has been a catch-all phrase, leprosy, for all sorts of skin conditions and diseases, since the time of the early church, it has also been a catch-all phrase for anything contagious that is also debilitating and terrible. It has become a metaphor then, not just for skin diseases, but the diseases of the heart. The church fathers used to write about leprosy as though it were an illustration for sin itself. And if you think about it, I think it's a pretty good one. Now, interestingly enough, modern-day Hansen's disease, which we would call leprosy, and it's been mostly eradicated, and it can be treated. It's typically only found extremely infrequently, and then in kind of the worst conditions in third world countries and abject poverty. But one of the interesting things that it does, and I believe it's a virus, but it actually removes your sensation of pain. And you might think that's good, like, oh, great, I don't want to feel pain. Pain is rotten. Who likes pain? But pain is actually how the body communicates to itself that something's wrong and ought to be addressed. If you had no pain, you would actually do more damage to yourself than less. So what happens is people with this condition, they cannot feel even just kind of the bumps and bruises of life. And so they, maybe they bump into something, they scrape themselves. They don't feel the scrape. They don't feel how it starts to get infected. They don't feel the pain or the burning or the fever, whatever it is, and the infection gets worse, and then it's out of control. And things are damaged, and things are deformed, and things fall off. You know not to touch the hot stove because you feel the pain, and your hand backs off. But if you didn't realize it was hot, you could stick your hand, and you could damage yourself severely. Doesn't sin, as one of its side effects, damage our ability to feel what is wrong? And isn't it highly contagious? A heart filled with sin doesn't have those warning signs like, ow, that's hot, or ooh, that hurt. It just does stuff, and it kind of bumbles and stumbles through life and causes damage to itself and to other people because those little warning signs, that hurt, take care of that, do something about that, avoid that. It's deadened and it's numbed, and we simply do stuff, and we say things, and it hurts people, and it damages ourselves. And as far as contagious is being concerned, spend the day in a room with someone with a terrible attitude. Just try it. Spend the day in a room with someone who is grumbling, who is complaining, or who is just in a really, really nasty mood. My guess is it doesn't even take a day. And it wears on you and it affects you. I mean, we respond when people yawn by yawning. What's going to happen when people are like, You can try to be loving and caring and compassionate, and it has a tendency to only go so far, and then exactly what they have, it infects you, and then what do you do with it? You go infect somebody else. Well, then that, and it just kind of goes and it goes and it goes. We spread it like a virus, and we spread it like a disease, and it numbs us to the pain that we are causing others, the pain that we are causing to ourselves, and it is debilitating and it is destructive. It's the leprosy of the heart. But Jesus has mercy and he has pity, and he will heal the most leprous of us and bring us from death to life. From being ostracized and outcast, that he will bring us back home. So will we be grateful? Will we be thankful will we praise? I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth bringing up again in this context. The early 20th century theologian Karl Barth suggested that the fundamental sin, meaning the sin which was at its most base, the cause and the beginning of all others, is not pride, as it's often explained. He says it's ingratitude. You go all the way back to the garden. What starts the whole process? You go back to your own life. What starts the ball rolling? He says it doesn't have to be pride, I know best. All it has to be is ingratitude. To stop thanking God then opens ourselves up to all sorts of trouble. Because as soon as you lose that posture of gratitude, as soon as you stop thanking God but thanking yourself, then it opens you up to all sorts of things. To trouble in yourself, to trouble with others. As soon as you stop thanking God for all that He's given you, everything, doesn't that open yourself up to all sorts of other sins? As soon as you stop looking at someone as one who has been created and loved by God to the same degree that you were, as God was willing to live and die for your sake, so He was for that person there. As soon as you forget that, isn't it easier to treat them more poorly? So he suggests that fundamentally it's not pride, it's ingratitude. As soon as we stop thinking, as soon as we stop thanking, it leads to all this other trouble. But what do we see here? Every reason in the world to be overwhelmed with gratitude and thanks, and yet only one of the 9. We who have been leprous of the heart and of the spirit and of the mind, healed by God, restored from death to life, and brought back home, how can we not be overwhelmed with thanks and praise? And yet, sometimes. But believe it or not, even our other readings, I think, are pointing in this direction. We are reading from Jeremiah at our first reading, just like we had last week from Lamentations, where he is watching the people of Jerusalem be carried away into exile. God's people have lost. They've been beaten. They've been conquered. They're being picked up as slaves and carried away to serve in a foreign land. Jeremiah is giving them instructions. Those of you who have been carried away in a foreign land, what does he say? Bloom where you are planted. Okay? He says, don't have the posture of a prisoner of war, always looking for escape. He says, settle where you have been taken. Plant gardens. Think for the future. Get married. Have kids. Get your kids married off. Pray for the city you have been taken to. Because if that city prospers, you will too. What is that other than a fundamental posture of gratitude? Do you have to be happy for the circumstances that are terrible? This is the consequence for national sin. But instead, he said, instead of being focused on the terrible troubles, be grateful of what God has granted you. And in that fundamental posture of thanks and praise, even carried off as slaves, this is who you ought to be. And Paul, writing to Timothy in the second letter, Ephesus, where Timothy is one of the leaders of the church, is having a hard time. And there's a lot of turmoil. And Paul says, I am writing to you in chains, and this is not a metaphor. Paul is in jail, and he has, not metaphorical, but literal chains around him. Paul is convinced that he is about to be put on trial, and he will be executed. And yet, what does he write? He says, I may be in chains. It's the word of God. That has never changed. Therefore, I endure everything for the sake of the elect, that they too may obtain the salvation that is in Christ Jesus for his eternal glory, because if we die with him, we will live with him. If we endure, we will reign. God is always, always, always faithful. So says the guy in prison thinking he's about to die. So says the guy who is writing to his protege, who is in charge of a church that is arguing, that is fighting, that is struggling, that is this close to splitting apart. And he says, offer praise, offer thanks. Be willing to suffer, for even in the suffering, we will be crowned with the glory of Christ, for he suffered too. And we can moan, and we can complain, and we can frack. Or we can remember what we have been given and offered time and time and time again. And we could recognize Diuno. It would have been enough if he had stopped years ago. But he didn't. God kept blessing me. Diuno, it would have been enough. That one time where I prayed and I knew I had been answered. That one time where I was desperate for his help and I know that he helped me. Diuno, it would have been enough. But he woke me up this morning and I had a new chance. And I had a new day. And Diuno, it would have been enough. I have enough already, more than enough, to give God continual thanks and praise. It is so easy to be one of the 9 who goes about our merry way, knowing that we've been healed and we are finally headed back home. Be the one. Be the one guy who knows. This is from death to life. This is from exile to home. I have been brought back to the land of the living. God has had mercy on me. And now, because of him, and only because of him, I will live. Be the one. Be thankful. Be grateful. May we each not let our circumstances overwhelm us. But Diuno, remember what he has already done and acknowledge it is more than enough. And may we indeed give thanks